Okay, I think we're going to get underway. Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to Book Passage. My name is Jonathan Spencer. I'm the assistant manager here. I'm going to make a quick procedural announcement just in case anybody didn't hear it prior to this. There is another event simultaneously going on across the courtyard in our gallery. If you get confused by the topic, that's where you're headed if you are not in the proper space. But we're here today to discuss a wonderful panel of authors about historical fiction. I am pleased to welcome our guest panelists for that spirited discussion and how it inspires and educates readers. Joining us are Francine Falk-Allen, Ginny Kubitz Moyer, and Janis Daly. I wrote that properly from left to right. I don't believe I did that last night. Each an award-winning author in their own right. Drawing upon their inspirations to write based on family history and native California settings, each of our guests today will be talking about how and why they began their writing journeys and share some of their works with us. Let's hear a bit about them. Inspired by the discovery that an ancestor founded the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania in 1850, Janis Daly's first two award-winning books, The Unlocked Path and The Path Beneath Her Feet, honor the work of pioneering women in medicine. Ginny Kubitz Moyer writes historical fiction set in her native California. Her novels include The Seeing Garden, A Golden Life, and today's featured work, The World at Home, which tells the tale of an orphan seeking fulfillment and love in 1944 San Francisco. Francine Falk-Allen is the author of the nonfiction titles Not a Poster Child and No Spring Chicken. Her historical novel, A Wolf in the Family, based on the true story of her maternal grandmother, has been described as a poignant and thought-provoking read about the power of forgiveness and the enduring legacy of secrets kept hidden throughout generations. It has recently garnered several additional awards, which we're very excited about. The common element in each of these novels is a woman who rises and meets the societal challenges and constraints of her time to define and control her future. Please welcome our guests.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan, and a thank you to Cheryl, who's not here, but she helped organize everything, especially for me coming from afar from New England, and to Francine for inviting me to join us today. So we're going to chat just a little bit about historical fiction, a little bit about the genre. Hopefully you're all fans, that's why you're here today, and then you'll hear from each of us on our inspiration and education that we went through and how we hope to inspire and educate readers as well. So I read Gone with the Wind back in high school, and many of you maybe have seen the movie but not read the book, but the book is about 900 pages long, so it was quite a momentous undertaking for a teenager, but I absolutely fell in love with it and fell in love really with the history, and that's what turned me on to historical fiction. Because I really think that it's a way for readers to step into different eras. And Margaret Mitchell really put me into Georgia and Atlanta during the Civil War and the Reconstruction period, with all those sights and sounds and sensations that really makes us not only escape, but helps us to learn about those eras and the people that lived through those times. So actually over the past 3 years since my first book, The Unlocked Path, came out, I've spoken about historical fiction and my writing at over 100 events. And I was at one presentation, and the next morning I woke up to an email in my inbox, and it was actually from one of the attendees the night before. She had purchased my book and went home and immediately started reading it. And she wrote me in the morning and said, "I am a new fan to historical fiction, with your book coming early in my fandom. If only my history teachers in school had assigned books like yours, instead of putting dry facts and dates on the blackboard for us to memorize, I would have loved history." So I really think her note speaks volumes about the power of historical fiction as a form of storytelling. When history becomes personal and relatable, it fosters empathy and deeper insights into the complexities of history as it captivates readers with a compelling blend of inspiration and education. And it's really that blend of storytelling that drives the genre's popularity, in my opinion anyway. But not just my opinion. Let's look at a couple of facts and some noteworthy books that are sitting in that genre. Okay, I always like to put the bookstore folks or publishers in the room on the hot seat and to name the Pulitzer Prize in Fiction for the past 3 years. give you a hint, they were all historical fiction. 2023, and actually Jonathan has put them out in case anyone wants to pick them up. 2023 was Trust by Hernan Diaz, set in the 1920s. Night Watch by Jane Ann Phillips, set in the Reconstruction era, post-Civil War. And this year's, or 2025's year, retelling of Huckleberry Finn with the unbelievable breakout novel James by Percival Everett. And one other book of note that has really propelled historical fiction into the forefront in the recent years, best-selling book of 2024 and the #1 most checked out book of libraries. Probably couldn't keep it on your shelf here, but it's here now, The Women
Yes.
by Kristen Hanna. Okay, now, if anyone has read it, The Women, anyone read the book? Okay, so you know that it's about Vietnam nurses, nurses who served during Vietnam, and what they faced when they came back from the war as well. Now, for those of us of a certain age, to think that the Vietnam War era is now considered historical is a little hard to swallow, but it does fit the general guideline of what deems historical fiction of set 50 years or more in the past. And 50 years was the Vietnam War. So you can find all of these books right here at Book Passage in your local library, thanks to authors like Kristen Hanna and Percival Everett and Jane Ann Phillips and Hernan Diaz and many, many others, including those here today, Francine Falk-Allen, Ginny, Kubitz, Moyer, and myself. So I think at this point you probably are a little tired of my Boston accent.
No.
Or my head cold. So I'm going to turn it over and we're going to speak with Francine first to share a little bit more about her origin story and how she brought it to life in A Wolf in the Family.
Thanks, Janis. So in 2000, I'm going to follow my notes because I tend to get verbose and get off on a tangent. In 2000, I flew down to Los Angeles for my Uncle Bill's memorial service. My mom was fond of saying that she was the eldest of 12 children that lived. She had passed about 7 years before. After the service in the church reception room, I was sitting across from my Aunt Dorothy, the youngest girl in that large family. She was talking about something that I was listening to absent-mindedly when the phrase, "when we were in the orphanage," jumped out at me. I said, "Wait a minute, Aunt Dorothy, wait a minute, what orphanage?" My mother had never mentioned this to me, and I later learned that my much older sister was also surprised to hear about this event. Aunt Dorothy then told me that my grandfather had taken his 5 youngest children to an orphanage in Arkansas or someplace. Then came several bombshell reasons and repercussions my aunt casually disclosed to explain why there was an orphanage in my family's past. These revelations left me completely stunned. Here's a photo of the orphans, plus my Uncle Frank at the top, who was 14, so the orphanage wouldn't take him. So he ended up a leaf on the wind. You can see by their clothing that they were not impoverished. The Depression was not the reason they were in an orphanage in early 1930. My grandfather had never lost his job as an engineer on the Union Pacific Railroad. Just in case you forgot what a steam train looked like. He was an engineer, first a fireman and then an engineer on a train just like this. Many trains just like that. Let's see, where am I? Sorry. Okay, my grandfather started work as soon as the Transcontinental Railroad was complete and was stationed in Ogden, Utah and Evanston, Wyoming from 1918 till the 1950s. Mother had told me when I started asking family questions at about 11 or 12 that her mother and father had separated and both had remarried. She left out many salient facts, however. My grandfather's second wife was the grandmother I'd spent time with. It was during the explanation about parental separations that Mother told me that Grandma Weber was not my real grandmother and gave me what was only the barest of facts. She also said that her real mother had then married an Indian, as if that were shameful. My grandfather lived 2 blocks away during the last few years of his life and spent a lot of evenings at our house when I was about 5 to 11 years old. But I never knew my blood grandmother, Nettie Naoma. I called her Naomi in The Wolf in the Family. And that's her on the cover there. I completely fabricated her personality, but my mother had told me a few things about her. I began asking my sister and remaining aunts and uncles for their memories regarding this story and their childhood. There were conflicting accounts, of course. I soon realized that my mother had not told me the whole truth because she was ashamed of what her father and her mother had done, and she was afraid I'd tell somebody about our family's dirty laundry. Well, I wrote a book about it. The story was just too juicy to leave alone. Once I started writing, I realized I had 2 aims I hadn't originally recognized. I wanted to vindicate my grandmother, who died when I was 2, and who was blamed and shunned by some family members for the choices she made, especially by her first daughter, my mother. Having been through a long ago difficult first marriage myself, I knew the angst my grandmother probably felt regarding her relationship and its failure, and guessed at the sorrow of having her children sent away. I also wanted to narrate my mother's childhood and youthful vignettes. Mom and I loved but did not truly understand each other, coming from vastly different eras. I tried to show in the novel how her upbringing could have made her the strict disciplinarian and intolerant person my sister and I knew. I wanted to use an actual wedding picture of my grandparents on the cover, and that's what that is. It's so divulging of their dynamic. She's clearly excited about the prospect of marriage to this handsome, hardworking man, and he's sitting ramrod straight, unsmiling. So here's one of the vignettes I included that my mother had recounted about her early 1900s childhood, greatly elaborated by myself, of course. Her parents had told her when she turned 12 that the coat she got for her birthday was the last clothing they'd be buying for her. They couldn't buy any new clothes for her to start junior high. In the following summer of 1921, when she was 12 and a half, she got a job picking beans. It was one thing to talk about earning money, and quite another thing to do it. First of all, you had to get up at 5, get your breakfast, and walk the 3 miles to the feed store, or get the streetcar if you had 3 cents for the one-way trip, in order to be at the bean field by 7. At less than 5 feet tall, Frances was one of the smallest workers in the bean field, but there were other children there too, some of them with their families, come from other parts of Utah or Wyoming, and a nice girl reminded her how to snap the green beans at the end of the stem so they'd be ready for market. When you got tired, it was easy to forget what you were supposed to do and not supposed to do. And some of the workers were not very nice. They acted like her being there was taking money out of their wallets. Well, she guessed in a way it was. They weren't all helpful like the girl across the row. That first day, she had dumped her beans from the cotton shoulder bag into the basket in her row, and the foreman had stopped her, putting his big hand on her arm, which alarmed her. He said gruffly, "You can't put them beans with stems on 'em in the basket, girl. You take those out, snap off the stems best you can, but you don't get paid for the time to take the stems off, you hear?" She nodded obediently, embarrassed to have been reprimanded, but she hadn't known. She thought she'd paid attention when they told her what to do, and she was tempted to say, "Nobody told me that," but she knew it was not smart to talk back, and she always tried to be respectful of men and ask the right questions of them. She also wasn't sure if she was out of the children should be seen and not heard and only speak when spoken to part of her life. So she dutifully lifted and picked out the beans with stems on them, made a sling in her lap with her apron, sat down on the dirt out of the way of the other workers, and snapped off the stems. Each afternoon, Frances pocketed her 80 cents, sometimes a little more. She'd been right that she wasn't going to be able to work 8 hours a day, especially when she was expected to help with dinner and the children when she got home. Mother was happy, though, that she'd gotten herself a job and was intending to buy herself a dress. It meant she wouldn't even have to buy material for Frances to sew. So she bought 3 new dresses, and her parents made her give one to her sister, who was a year younger, further antagonizing a competitive attitude they already shared.
And now we're gonna hear from Ginny a little bit more about her inspiration for a brand new novel. It's been not even 6 weeks, Ginny?
December 9th.
There we go.
However,
4
2
weeks.
months, yeah.
4 weeks.
Thank you.
The world at home.
Oh, great. Everybody can hear me? Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for being here, everybody, and I'm very glad you did not have to drive through buckets of rain to get here, so hooray. Love the sound. One of the fun things about being a writer I've found is that you never really know when an idea is going to grab you. And in the case of The World at Home, this novel started in December 2019, when I went with my family to see the Nutcracker at San Francisco Ballet. And on the cover of the program, there was a little banner saying that it was the 75th anniversary of the first performance of the Nutcracker in San Francisco, which took place on Christmas Eve, 1944. And as I was reading through the program before the ballet started, there was a further little note that said that 1944 San Francisco production was actually the first time the entire Nutcracker ballet had ever been performed anywhere in the US, which surprised me. I hadn't known that, and somehow I had thought it had been around longer than that. So I remember in the car on the way home that evening from the city, just kind of thinking about that, and thinking about the fact that this story, which I don't know if we can even call it a story, really, because if you know the Nutcracker, like the second half is no plot. It's just a bunch of dancing around food. But this story of, this sort of whimsical, fantastical, childhood, innocent story had its American debut during a world war. And I wondered how this story of sugar plums and snowflakes and everything would land with people who had, for the last couple of years been living through all the stress and fear and grief and uncertainty and everything that comes with war. And the contrast between those two really struck me, right? So my mind began to spin, and I thought there might be a story here, right? Which is a great feeling. So I started to research what I could about that first production, which quickly made me realize, and if you read The World at Home, you'll see this, that first production was very much a wartime production. It was very marked by World War II. And so I realized that what I really needed to do was start researching the war in San Francisco. And I quickly realized that the story I wanted to tell was not primarily about ballet, that ballet could be a subplot, but that I really wanted to write a story about a city in wartime and what it was like for the people who lived there. And I learned a lot about San Francisco. I grew up in Sunnyvale, and I hadn't known the role that San Francisco played during the war and how much it was affected by the war. I learned that over 1.6 million troops shipped out to war from Fort Mason, and that during the war, the city was this revolving door of servicemen coming in and out. And you also had war workers coming from across the country to work in the shipyards across the bay. You even had the wives of servicemen who followed them across the country until they hit San Francisco and couldn't go any further, right? So the city was very, very full. And it was a very emotionally charged atmosphere too, as you can imagine. And one detail that I came across in my reading really kind of struck me. It said that one of the men who had been in the war and left from San Francisco said that when the ship he was on went under the Golden Gate Bridge, it went completely silent, right? This ship of men sailing off to war, because there was this latent awareness that San Francisco might be the last bit of home soil that you ever touch, right? You're going off into the unknown. And so I was just thinking about all the emotion around that. And because I have a fondness for coming of age stories, right? I mean, everything from I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings to The Devil Wears Prada, right? Like, I love stories of young women fighting their way in the world. I decided my protagonist would be a young woman. So she is 20 years old. Her name is Irene Cleary, and she's a seamstress. And she is also, I guess you could say, I also have sort of a fondness for the underdog. So she is somebody who's not had the easiest life. She never knew her family. She was raised in an orphanage, which was a good orphanage, but nonetheless, you don't have a family around. And has never really known life outside of San Francisco. And we learn that at one point, the story opens in 1944. We learn that a year or so before, she had actually wanted to join the Women's Army Corps and go see the world. And then just as she was about to do that, Anna, the woman who had taught her to sew, died and left Irene the seamstress shop. So Irene kind of is going to be in San Francisco, and the new worlds that she's going to discover will have to be at home, and hence the title. And she will discover a lot of new worlds. She will discover new professional and creative worlds, because she will help make costumes for that first production of the Nutcracker. She will also develop her skill as a very skilled dress designer, right, which is something that she's eager to kind of pour herself into. She will discover new worlds about herself too, because she's going to learn some things about her family and her parents that she didn't know, and it kind of make her reevaluate her sense of who she is in the world. She will also especially discover new worlds through the people that she meets. She volunteers, as a lot of young women did during World War II, at the USO. There were USO centers across the country, and she dances with servicemen there. And that ends up being significant for reasons I won't go into because they're spoilerish. But she also meets people through her work that open up parts of San Francisco that she never thought she would have access to. And I'm going to read one quick little excerpt here. This is page 1, chapter 1, very beginning of the book, so you'll get a feel for Irene's voice right off. 1944. I met Max and Cynthia Burke on the kind of day that makes you never want to leave San Francisco. If you know the city, you can picture the sort of day I mean. Walking up the steep street toward their apartment building, I felt that lift of spirits you get when the sky is blue and clear and the windows reflect the sun like little bursts of crystal. A day where the city seems to be showing off, flaunting the beauty of the bay and the hills beyond. Even in wartime, with gray battleships brooding in the water, it's a lovely place. Admittedly, I don't have much to compare it to. I grew up here and have hardly ever left the city, to be honest. But there's always something new to admire, and on that September day, the object of my admiration was Nob Hill, home to more luxury apartments per square block than anywhere else in the city. The Mark Hopkins Hotel, with its rooftop bar at the top of the Mark, was the only place in that expensive neighborhood I'd ever actually been inside. Going up the street, I quickened my pace, which wasn't easy. This hilly city makes you work. I was wearing heels and my latest creation, a dove gray suit with deep red trim around the edges, consisting of a peplum jacket and skirt with a kick pleat. I'd saved hard to buy the hat, a red one with an upturned brim that seemed to be saluting the sky. I had one pair of good nylons left, and I carefully skirted the edges of a small hedge, for to snag them would be a tragedy. It was my best outfit, and I needed to wear my best, for I was about to meet with Mrs. Cynthia Burke, formerly Miss Cynthia McNeil, about a dress she wanted altered. She had phoned my shop the day before, surprising me in the middle of a fitting. I'm trying to find a seamstress who'll be able to come tomorrow, she'd said. I'm quite eager to start on remaking this dress. I explained that I'd been an apprentice to Anna and the shop was now mine and that I'd be delighted to come the next day at any time that was convenient. So we settled on 3 o'clock and I said a poised goodbye, as if I were used to making dresses for the socialites of Nob Hill, managing to contain my wild excitement at the astonishing opportunity that had just appeared on my doorstep. On the sidewalk opposite the imposing Fairmont Hotel, I paused, taking a moment to catch my breath. Just beyond the hotel was the Burke's apartment building. It was L-shaped, with ornate entrance pillars and a paved forecourt, its doorway flanked with manicured trees growing in fancy planter boxes. I'd seen it once before, coming back from the top of the Mark in April, but had never dreamed I'd ever be invited inside. My confidence began to waver, so I paused and opened my compact. The red precision of my lipstick gave me a quick shot of courage. Beneath the hat, my light brown hair, dressed in victory rolls, looked as neat and glossy as the hair of a woman in a magazine. You walk like you're someone, said a soldier I danced with my first week at the USO. I tucked that comment away in my memory and bring it out anytime I need a little confidence. My posture has always been excellent. I have the nuns to thank for that. And when you grow up as I have, without the benefit of family, you learn how to compensate for it and how you carry yourself. We'll stop there.
Those are 2 great examples right there of historical fiction and how it can make personal connections. I don't know about any of the rest of you, but if you were starting to think about some of your own origin stories and some of maybe your connections. I didn't know anything about Ginny's book. And when I learned about it, I was like, oh my goodness. My parents were 2 of those people in San Francisco. My dad was in the Navy during World War II. He actually shipped out of San Diego, but he luckily came home into Oakland. And my mom, whom he had met at a USO show dance in Boston, traveled by train from Boston by herself to meet my dad when his ship docked in October of 1945. And they married at Grace Cathedral.
Wow.
So that was, that's the beauty of historical fiction, how you can start to make those connections. And it's very personal and relatable, and you can think about the people and those characters and how they must have lived. And it gives you a glimpse into maybe how somebody you know and love might have lived. So I knew my parents' story, for sure, and I knew 3 of my grandparents' stories pretty well, but I didn't know my grandmother Robinson's story, and she had passed well before I was born. But I always had a kinship to her and felt a closeness. My dad had given me a small portrait of her. She had beautiful red hair, which I once upon a time did, and thanks to my stylist back in Boston, I still do every 6 weeks. But she also had 2 older brothers and 2 sons, and I have 2 older brothers and 2 sons. So I finally decided just about 10 years ago that I was going to pick up genealogy research, and I was going to dive into that grandmother's family that I knew nothing about. And that unfortunately I had never asked my dad before he passed, which is, you know, one of the biggest regrets and mistakes we all make is not asking those questions of family members. So I dove in and I tried to find information about my grandmother Robinson, only knowing that she had originally come from Philadelphia. I couldn't find anything about her. Went back and tried to find information on her parents. Nothing about her parents. Went back one more generation and hit the mother lode. That's where I met her grandfather, my great-great, William Shannon Pierce, who I learned was not only an abolitionist lawyer in Philadelphia in the 1850s, defending runaway slaves and earning them their freedom in the cases that he was their defense trial lawyer. He also must have believed in the rights of women, because he was not only the father of 7 daughters and 1 son, God love George, he, as I learned in my research, was one of the founders of the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania.
Wow.
The first and longest running medical school for women from 1850 to 1970. And after I read that one line, I mean, I was already proud when I heard about his abolitionist work. But when I read about the Women's Medical College, and having gone to a women's college myself, I thought, wow, that's amazing that women that wanted to be called to practice medicine with an accredited degree, because that was the difference, because women have been healers and caregivers and midwives forever, but it was being able to be called a doctor that these women demanded, until some forward-thinking men in Pennsylvania decided to help them and open the school for them, because they were denied admission to almost every other school. And by the time I'm getting then an idea of writing a book, because I felt that not only my ancestors' work in opening this school needed to be honored, but once I started to meet the graduates and the students and the women that had gone to that college and all that they accomplished, I felt their stories needed to be told. They needed to be educated. They needed to become a new women, educated and independent women to fight through. Medical school is tough enough for anyone, let alone a woman in the 1800s. The curriculum designed for the college was deemed to be more intensive than the male schools in the area, so that women had to doubly improve their work and abilities. So I decided I would write a book, and I would honor those women and hopefully educate readers about them. And also, part of me was thinking, women doctors today, who now make up almost 40% of our physicians, thankfully, and 51% of our med school students are women, they need to be inspired by those women that unlocked the path for them. So that was my first book, The Unlocked Path, which follows my fictional character. Through the beauty of historical fiction, I could come up with a composite character and follow her into the medical school, through her residency and early practice. And then I had to decide the setting of the book. Philadelphia for sure, but what time period? And I decided it would loosely follow the time period of my grandmother's life, who set me off on that kind of rabbit hole of research. So the book spans 1897 to 1923, and 1920, so 23 years. And if you can think of the history of that time period, we had the suffrage movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment, accomplishments made. We had World War I. We had the sinking of the Titanic. We had the Spanish flu. We had automobiles coming onto roads. We had telephones coming into homes. So there was so much rich history that I could draw on and anchor the story that made it just a little bit easier to figure out where my character was going and how she'd be impacted by many of those events. So that's part of my origin story and how I got started in this wonderful world of writing. But I'd like to hear again now a little bit from Ginny, and then we'll go to Francine again to hear a little bit more about your books and educating readers.
Tell me if this is still good. Okay, great. My story is also, again, historical fiction, but I don't write about famous people. I just write about ordinary people in different times in history, and I love historical fiction that immerses me in a time period, right? And I like to try to create that for my readers too, so whether it's 1910 or 1938 or 1944, I want readers to sort of look up from my book and it takes a moment to sort of resurface and be back in 2026 now. And I just love to be faithful to the way people dressed and the way, what they ate and how they made a phone call and all of that. So I try to make it like time travel. I really do think historical fiction can be like time travel, maybe the closest we can get to time travel. And so for this particular book, also for some of the San Francisco specific things I did, I read a lot about the city in World War II. I did on-the-ground research as well. I don't live in the city, I live on the peninsula, but went back and forth and checked locations of things and where a character could walk to reasonably in a day and that sort of thing. Probably the best research I did is that there are 2 scenes that take place at the top of the Mark, which is that bar on the top floor of the Mark Hopkins Hotel, which was really important in World War II. It was a big place for servicemen to go. There was always a line out the door of servicemen and their dates. And I had last been there, I'd been there once before, I think it was 2003. And I said to my husband, we need to do research. So we sat there at a little table with drinks, on an evening in May, overlooking Grace Cathedral and seeing fog pour in over the Golden Gate. It was one of those iconic San Francisco moments, and it was like, if only all research were like this. This is amazing. Really fun. Irene, I mentioned earlier, works, volunteers at the USOs, and those were begun in 1941, I believe it was 41, certainly during World War II, as a way to offer, and literally this was their mission, wholesome recreation for servicemen who were on leave or stationed in different places. So if you were a junior hostess, you had to go through a whole character vetting process. I found a wonderful book, and it talked to women who had been junior hostesses who were there to sort of dance with the servicemen and play ping pong and just be a friendly face away from home. And I found on eBay and bought a USO guide to San Francisco from January 1945, so slightly after, a month or so after this book takes place. And it's a little magazine that they would give to servicemen on leave in San Francisco that had all the information you need to know about how to have a good, wholesome time in the city, okay? They left out all the not wholesome stuff, whatever they deemed that. But, there was information about the zoo and, places to see movies and where to get your laundry done and where to go dancing and all of this. And this little magazine is very precious. And the one thing I love most about it is that it came to me and it was folded in half, like the long way, right? And I love that fold, I love that crease, because I could just imagine that some serviceman, lands in San Francisco, gets off the boat, somebody hands him this guide, he folds it in half, sticks it in a pocket, and goes around his weekend in the city, right? It just made it very real to me, so that was really fun. For the Nutcracker pieces of this, I spent a really wonderful afternoon at the Museum of Performance and Design in San Francisco, and going through the Russell Hartley archives from the San Francisco Ballet Archives. Russell Hartley was the 19-year-old character dancer with the ballet who designed the costumes for that first production of Nutcracker in 1944. It was not easy. I won't give too many details, they're all in the book. You're dealing with wartime rationing and making a bunch of costumes, and they got creative. But he had written up his memories of that first performance, and they're wonderfully detailed, and I worked in as much of that as I possibly could, so that was really delightful. So all of that are just ways to, I think, really try to give that time travel experience to the readers of my book. But I think the thing about historical fiction that I love about it is that it's not just a trip to the past, but it also illuminates the present. And at the core of all of my books are characters who are grappling with those sort of big questions that everybody deals with in every generation about why am I here, and how do I want to be a person in the world, and who is most important to me, and how does that affect the decisions I make, and all those questions of identity and purpose and agency and love and all of that. And Irene grapples with all of those. And she goes through some hard stuff, and she comes out the other side as we do in life. And she's changed by them, as we are too. And I think too, one more thing that I kind of want the reader to take away from her story, I don't usually know what the sort of theme of a book is until I'm maybe 80% of the way through it or so. But it became very clear to me as I finished this book and as I got further into it, that given Irene's interest in creativity and dressmaking and dress design, given the whole subplot of the ballet and helping to make the costumes for that this is really, I think, at its core, a story about the need for art and creativity and beauty and even whimsy during difficult times. Whether those are difficult times globally or difficult times personally or both, we need all of that, right? That is what is the touchstone of our own humanity. And just to kind of end on that note, I'm going to read one more short excerpt, which comes from much later in the book. I will mention that Irene lives in the Fillmore in San Francisco, and sort of Upper Fillmore, Lower Pacific Heights, and there is a violinist who often comes and plays on the street corner there. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, and on an impulse, I bundled up in my wool coat and went outside. It was bright and crisp, one of those chilly mornings where you instinctively cross to the sunny side of the street to get as much warmth as possible. I saw the milkman making his rounds and a delivery man unloading a van at Gino's grocery. At the streetcar stop, I saw a young black woman in a heavy coat and coveralls, her hair tied up, holding a metal lunchbox. Another Edith going off to build ships, probably holding in her mind the image of a man, a sweetheart, a brother, a cousin, who was somewhere across the seas. Everyone knew someone. Everyone had lost someone. I walked up Fillmore with no particular destination in mind, but at the intersection with Jackson, I paused. There was the violin player, in the clothes he always wore, with the addition of a shapeless coat and a muffler. He was opening his case, flexing his fingers, ready to make music. I wondered why he did it. It wasn't for money, for he never put out a cup for coins. He could play at home where it was warm instead of standing in the cold archway of a church on a December day. Dancing around like a snowflake when people are dying, Pauline had said. It just seemed so pointless somehow. Finding a little patch of sunlight on the pavement, I stepped into it. I don't think he saw me, even though I was only a few feet away. He never seems to see anyone. He raised his bow, closed his eyes, and began. The piece was from Swan Lake, a song that always made Anna close her eyes, as if doing so would let the notes sink ever more deeply into her soul. I closed my eyes too and pictured her again. Her figure not fat, not slim, but somewhere in between. Her dark gray hair always pinned up and back. The glasses she wore when doing any sort of detailed work. The quiet smile she gave me when I'd done something really well. She was an intensely private person, which suited us both. She'd never have worked well with a more gregarious girl. Still, I wish now that I'd asked her more about herself. After her death, I'd found some photographs, along with various documents and personal letters written in Russian. I'd saved them because it felt wrong to discard them. The song floated in the morning air. A man waiting at the streetcar stop lowered his paper to listen. The workman unloading a crate by the curb paused, putting his hands in his armpits for warmth. And I, standing in the patch of sunlight, remembered a day when Anna and I had heard the song on the radio. It was a break between customers, and we'd been drinking tea with strawberry jam in it. She always made it that way. And eating Russian cookies. And out of nowhere, she said one of the most personal things I'd ever heard from her. A beautiful thing, the ballet, she'd said. Some people ask why I spend so much money on a ticket, because what do you keep when the evening's over? But you keep the memories. I turned and walked home, even though the song wasn't over. I did not want to hear it end.
Forgive me for reading. I'm envious of you guys that can be so extemporaneous. So the research aspect of this book. I had done extensive genealogical research into my dad's Allen family back to the 1600s, which I hope to use in future historical fiction about my Irish and American grandmothers. Some of my maternal cousins had gotten that far back with the Weber family, a wolf in the family is based upon. I called them the Wolves in this, and their real last name was Weber. I was wanting to protect my cousins and their parents, even though their parents are all dead and gone. I'd always thought my mother's claim that her grandmother descended from the Mayflower Smiths was far-fetched, but it turned out to be true. But I leaned on genealogy only partially for the fictionalized story. For this, the real gold mine for me was census records. These indicated people living in a household, their work, their level of education, where they were born and when, and who lived next door. From those, I looked up the address of the family's Ogden home on Zillow. I'd seen their shabby house when I was 6 on a family vacation. It was gone, but a block away was a similar, very modest home where it was hard to imagine 10 to 14 people living. This little house is very similar to the house they lived in, but this one's much nicer. I found a record of the boarding house my grandfather lived in later in Evanston, Wyoming, and found that the house was still standing and there were photos of the inside. From this I learned that his living conditions had improved dramatically after he put the kids in the orphanage, with polished banisters and a separate back staircase, which may have facilitated his having more than a professional relationship with the widow who owned the house. Now I think I've tossed this to the floor, but wait till you see this one. Oh, come on. So this is where he lived after he and my grandmother split up, and there were only like 7 or 8 people living in this house. So it was a much nicer situation once he dropped the kids at the orphanage. I learned that Ogden was sophisticated, with modern architecture, good hotels, streetcars, and indoor plumbing. Although my mother's family was not so worldly, the kids had been told when they moved from Kansas that when they saw the Mormons, they would have horns on their heads. I was surprised to learn that the orphanage was in Kansas, not Arkansas, as my aunt had originally thought, but that the Lutheran Children's Home was 10 miles away from Arkansas City in Kansas. As a little girl, my aunt would have remembered just bits about where she'd been and what she'd heard. I found a photo of the orphanage in Winfield, Kansas, and contacted the Library and Historical Society there to get more information about the children's home, assisting me to set up chapters about the orphanage. I researched what the salary of an engineer would be and determined if they could have afforded a car. No. Or a vacuum. Probably not. More likely a carpet sweeper. I found old Ogden newspapers online which had the names of stores and ice cream parlors and informed me on the cost of clothing, and were the source for divorce records, or the lack thereof, which drove parts of my story. Here's a vignette I made up completely that precedes my grandparents' separation in the book. Okay. So, in actuality, my mother had gotten a job in a boarding house when she was 14, moved out, and then her sister moved out a year later and did the same thing, got a job in a boarding house. They both quit high school in order to start working. Carl, can you come hold Clarence for me and feed him while I finish frying this chicken? Naomi called out from the kitchen, not from the chicken. Jack asked me to come play ball with him for a while before dinner. Can't you get Herman to do it? Carl pleaded. He likes doing girl things. Herman, can you get in here? What? Herman called from the boys' bedroom. Come in here and help me. Herman dragged himself away from the Sears and Roebuck catalog to help his mother. Goodness sakes, Naomi exclaimed. What do I have to do to get some help around here? I swear, with Francis and Sis gone, this place is a madhouse. Frank Sr. appeared in the kitchen doorway smoking his pipe. What's the commotion? I'm just trying to get some help with this baby, with our baby, so I can finish fixing dinner. You don't know how hard it is for me now with 9 kids and no older girls here anymore to help. Frank cleared his throat. Well, Sis comes by to help you when she can, and you could probably get Frances in here from time to time. All she'd have to do is ask. Naomi stopped what she was doing, turning the heat to low under the chicken, and faced Frank with one hand on her hip and the other holding the long-handled fork. She pointed it at him, fire in her eyes. Oh, all right, yes. Just take Clarence, Dorothy, and Willie with me, 2 in the baby buggy, while I push it with one hand, and holding Willie's hand with the other, walk the mile down to the boarding house, they didn't have a phone, and ask Mrs. Birch to please let me talk to my daughter while she's working, and then ask Frances could she come over here and watch the little ones while I do whatever I need to do. Is that what you think I should do? Frank recoiled a little. You don't have to get all haughty about it. Naomi was close to seething. She turned back to the stove and turned around again. Frank, I've been a good wife to you. I've been a good mother to these kids, but you're almost never here. You're here for a week to enjoy your paper, go to church with us, or do whatever you want to do. Her eyes widened at this last bit, implying that she was what he wanted to do, and reminding him she had always complied with that. You don't change diapers, or do laundry, or grocery shop, or cook, or even work in the garden much. I'm not saying you're supposed to, but it's a lot for one woman to do and keep an eye on 9 kids. I don't know what I'd do if Herman didn't like to do girl things, as Carl calls it. Don't you see all that? Well, I see that Herman needs to do more boys' activities, that's for sure, Frank said sharply. I caught him dressing up with Marie in girls' clothes last Saturday afternoon. Marie said they were playing house and pretending they were grown-up ladies, and she needed him to be her neighbor friend. How could you let the boy do that? Naomi darted a look at Herman. Frank was acting as if he were not right there in the room. Luckily, Herman didn't seem to be paying much attention. My job's to bring home the bacon, and I do that, Frank said. I've done that since day one. I put a roof over your head, and for all these kids, too. Your job is to take care of the children and also to do things for me when I need you to. Nothing's changed, Naomi, and I don't appreciate your attitude. Seems like every time I come home here, you're in a rotten mood. He turned on his heel and went out to the front porch to smoke his pipe. Oh, that's just grand, Naomi muttered under her breath. Maybe I won't be as friendly the next time you feel amorous, coming in from the rails like I'm your floozy and I should be at your beck and call. Well, I'll tell you what. What, Mama? Herman asked from his spot at the kitchen table, feeding Clarence his bottle. Oh, nothing, honey. Mama's just tired, she called out. Marie, come set the table and tell your brothers to come on in for dinner. So that was what life was like for women with large families of modest means in early 20th century America. I appear briefly in the epilogue with personal vignettes I recall about my grandfather. Coincidentally, this segues into my memoir, Not a Poster Child, about growing up with a disability, almost as if A Wolf in the Family were a prequel, although I hadn't seen that until the novel was finished. So that's non-fictional history for me since I'm 78. Please be sure to buy something here at Book Passage, even if it's only a card. They're an important cultural hub here in Marin.
Well, I'm just going to quickly share one scene from what actually turned out to be the sequel to The Unlocked Path, which is The Path Beneath Her Feet. Picks up my main character, again, Dr. Eliza Edwards, in the middle of the Depression, so 1936, 1937. And for both of these books, for my research, I relied heavily on archives. Most importantly was that Drexel University had acquired all of the materials from Women's Medical College. Women's Medical eventually merged with them in 2000 or so. So they had vast amounts of archival research materials, and I was fortunate to go there and spend 2 whole days, one for the first book and one for the second book, and they pulled files and files for me. And it was in my second trip that I learned more about the work of the American Women's Hospital Unit that served overseas during World War I and then later here in the States during the Depression. So I'll just set up the scene I'm going to read for you. That it's 1937, and Dr. Eliza Edwards finds herself jobless. Of course, if there were any jobs available during that time, they were going to the men, the heads of households. She had lost her job and her purpose until she receives a phone call from a medical school classmate and a friend of hers, Dr. Charlotte Fairbanks, who was a real-life 1901 graduate of women's medical. So she picks up the phone. "Why, Charlotte, how lovely to hear from you. How's the North Country? Do you still have snow?" "Honestly, I haven't noticed. I guess there's a snowbank or two around. I want to let you know I'm coming to Boston. The American Women's Hospital contacted me. They dug my name out from their old records. They're in dire need of a surgeon." At the height of the Great War in 1918, Charlotte had traveled with a group of 60 other women to France. Denied by the United States Army to serve with its medical corps, instead, the doctors, nurses, dentists, and other staff, all women, arrived in France as volunteers, committed to providing medical and emergency relief for French civilians and refugees. Upon the armistice, and in recognition of her work, the French government awarded a gold Médaille Militaire of Gratitude and Honorary Citizenship to Chief Surgeon Charlotte Fairbanks and other members of the AWH. "Why, that's wonderful, Charlotte," said Eliza. "Needed," she thought. Eliza twisted the phone cord in her hands. An esteemed medical association needed 66-year-old Charlotte. Her qualifications as a talented surgeon remained in high demand. Eliza said and continued, "Did I tell you I met Dr. Lovejoy, head of the AWH, on my way home from Georgia? Her last seatmate mistook her for a daughter and grandmother. She had a good laugh on him. What a force she is. She had just toured the facilities in Greenville, South Carolina. How old do you think she is? Dr. Lovejoy's stamina for all that traveling is amazing." "Dr. Lovejoy is 2 years older than I," Charlotte said. "I expect she has no plans to slow down, nor should she. With all that's going on in Spain and rumbling from Italy and Germany, I fear dark days lie ahead. War-stricken areas may again put out the plea for our services. Many of us will answer to join our sisters over there. Is that where you're heading? Leaving from Boston to go to Spain?" "No. What else did Dr. Lovejoy mention about their work in Appalachia?" "Not much, but the idea of their health centers intrigued me. At the library, I found a smattering of articles in some South Carolina newspapers. An article in the Spartanburg paper quoted the County Department of Health as reporting that the AWH-sponsored nutrition classes, which teach the importance of healthier diets, has stemmed the spread of pellagra and cut deaths by more than 1/2. Yes, progress has been made, but years of vitamin deficiency and tobacco use by the women have produced an above-average incidence of cleft lips and palates. They've also identified multiple children requiring tonsillectomies and adenoidectomies." Eliza had seen some of the photos in the newspaper articles of the rural families living in squalor. 6 or more malnutrition children standing next to rail-thin parents. To think that in addition to the scourge of pellagra, they also suffered from deformities and illnesses, which required surgeries, tugged at Eliza's heart. "I'm guessing that Dr. Lovejoy wants the best the AWH can offer to those families. She wants you to perform the surgeries?" "Yes. I'm heading to Tennessee. I may be lined up with appointments from morning to night for at least a week." "That's so kind of you, Charlotte." Eliza's fingers ran up and down the twisted phone cord, beginning to wonder about the point of Charlotte's call. Sharing news of the trip didn't warrant the expense of a long-distance phone call by the frugal Vermonter. "Eliza, I can't do this alone. I could use an assistant, someone I know and trust." The phone cord unwound itself as Eliza dropped it. "That's quite a request, Charlotte. So you'll have to pick up a copy to find out if Eliza goes to Tennessee. But I really felt that, again, when I did all this research and I learned about the work of the American Women's Hospital Unit that I knew nothing about, and the incredible work they did in rural America in the 30s and 40s, and traveling to Appalachia, and setting up health centers. They had a traveling health mobile that went up and down the dirt and mud-filled roads of the mountains of Appalachia. I really felt that people needed to learn and celebrate what they had done in the same way of bringing health care to those communities, the way that so many of us learned about the pack horse librarians who brought literacy to those same communities. So that's what I'm hoping the Path Beneath Her Feet will do. I think we are just about out of talking time, except to answer any questions that we might have from the audience before we turn over to files and signings.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been very illuminating. How important is like an exact detail in telling your story? So, for example, with the story on San Francisco, if your character is eating at a restaurant on Fillmore Street, how important is it during a certain period of time? How important is it that there was actually a restaurant with that name, or does it matter that much?
Oh, yeah, I would say, I think, I'll project or I'll use the mic.
No, you've got your mic right there, so, yeah.
I'm used to having mic, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's going to be different for every author and every project. I always try to make it as accurate as possible, so I do reference names of restaurants in here that actually were there in San Francisco in 1944. And the one thing I give myself a complete pass on is weather. I remember once reading an interview with a historical novelist who said, if I say that it rained in Dayton, Ohio in 1850, I go back and I check and I make sure it rained in Dayton, Ohio in 1850. And that is a level of accuracy I'm not committed to. I give myself a pass on the weather. I'm not going to put a blizzard in San Francisco, obviously, but I allow myself some leeway there. But I think with any time you're writing historical fiction, it's tough because I don't know what I don't know about the past. I try to be accurate in like how you made a phone call or whatever, but I have blind spots, so I try to look into those blind spots as much as I can. I mean, case in point, I have 2 teenage boys, right? They don't know that when I was growing up, watching TV meant reading the TV guide and seeing what was on, right? And like, if it was on and you missed it, right? And you couldn't binge watch. And commercials were for running down the hall to use the bathroom and then powering back, and your sister's like, it's on, right? Like, it's so different from how they watch TV, and unless they talk to me or, watch a movie with somebody watching TV from the 1980s or whatever, they don't know how different it is. So I think that's always the challenge, right? Is like, how do we figure out what those blind spots are and how do we look into them?
I'd like to just always remind folks that it is fiction, so we do try our hardest, but that it's really important to also, for historical fiction, read the author notes, because that's where the authors will usually disclose, hey, I took a little liberty here or creative license here, because I couldn't find what the weather was like in Dayton in 1850.
Go ahead.
This is a question for Francine about A Wolf in the Family, because I grew up in a middle-class family, not rich, but I never had to buy my own clothes or make my own clothes. So I was really struck hearing about this 12-year-old girl, and she got a coat, but it was the last thing that her parents or her mother were going to buy her. Did these people know how dirt poor they were? Or was this just like normal life for them and everybody they knew?
I don't think they considered themselves to be dirt poor at all. I think they considered themselves to be sort of middle class, lower middle class. Most girls knew how to sew then. You had to be upper class and have a wealthy father who was like, a businessman who owned a lot of property or something like that to be a girl who didn't know how to sew and do that sort of thing. I think it was somewhat unusual for them to have to leave home at 14 and get work, but my mom did go back to school when she was married and got her high school diploma. There was one of the girls actually graduated high school, all the boys did, and she and her sister and the other sister did not. So she went back and got her diploma. But I don't really think that they thought of themselves. My mother really wanted to convey to me that she didn't have much money when they were young, and that's why she wanted me to see their house. And, the more kids you have, of course, the money's going to be spread thinner. So when they were young, when there were fewer kids, it was easier. but they kept, I mean, there wasn't birth control, you know, and my grandfather felt he had a right to have sex, and that was, you know, and I imagine my grandmother must have liked it, because in the long run, she actually bore 15 children. And
Wow.
so she must have not, I mean, you know, she could have like found a way not to do it if she didn't want to. But yeah, I don't know if they really considered themselves to be poverty stricken, just like didn't have a lot of money. There's one place in the book where I have sis say, well, we're not poor, but we're not exactly rich either. Also, that's one of the questions I bring up there's a reader's guide in the back, so it makes it a good book for book clubs, because there are a lot of things like that you can discuss. So yeah, thank you for the question.
Anybody else have a question? I see a hand or two, sure. We'll get back.
All right, I'm an engineer, so these will probably sound like very ignorant questions in the literary world. Open-ended questions. One, I keep hearing, was Steinbeck an influence for you folks? I hear a lot of, when I remember reading his stuff, and the gritty realism, I sense some of that in some of your books. And that was just an open-ended comment. My main question is, how do you find the courage to write about somebody else and get into their heads? Like I'm dumbfounded how you can do it. I love it, but it's just, and that was another open-ended question. I just think it's wonderful that you can do that. If you have any comments.
Anybody want to go for that? I think I don't know if it didn't, the courage for me was I hoped that my cousins would not be offended by the way I presented their parents. And I didn't have to worry about my mom because she was gone, and so it wasn't so much courage. I think that as a woman, I have a pretty good idea what women talk about and how they think. Maybe I may have projected my personality onto my grandmother, you know, because I just felt like there's a lot that happens in here, and I felt like she got kind of the short end of the stick in the long run, although at the end she found that forgiveness was the best revenge. But yeah, that's my answer to that.
Cool.
I can take the Steinbeck question. I taught high school English for 26 years, and one of the books I taught was The Grapes of Wrath, which I love, which students often were daunted by the size. It's one of the long Steinbecks. But one thing I love about his writing is that it is very, it's almost cinematic, right? Like, you know, he describes like the bug coming in through the, you know, when they're driving the truck and he picks it up and like crushes it and flicks it out into the stream of air, right? And there's that level of detail that is so immersive, and I love that. And I think in some sense, I read his books and it feels almost cinematic to me. And so I've had people say, oh, I feel like your book's like a movie, right? Because I feel like I'm right there, and I feel like when I'm writing it, I'm watching a movie, but I'm also in a movie as I'm writing it, if that makes sense. That's kind of my approach. And I think a lot of that, I think Steinbeck was kind of an influence because I love that aspect of his writing.
I still remember the turtle.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I like to write like it's a movie also, but I think I got mine more from other authors like Louise Erdrich and Dave Eggers and some other folks.
Janis, do you have a?
No, I was just gonna say, I also just really try to put myself into the scene, but I also use people I know to influence a character. In both of my books, Eliza Edwards' best friend and classmate, Olga, is totally my roommate from college, my best friend. I mean, I can hear her voice speaking to Eliza the same way Jean would speak to me. So, yeah, they always say, be nice to writers because you may end up dead.
Hi, Francine. I was just curious, what happened, or why were the children put into the orphanage? Did you answer that?
That's one of the big reveals in the story.
To buy the book.
Yeah, there was a marital problem, and then there were some other problems, and anyway, yeah, that was one of the things that I was gobsmacked by when my aunt told me the story, because my mother hadn't told me. So I'm sorry, but I gotta read the book.
Anybody else have a quick question before we move on to the signing portion of the evening.
Oh, if the Zoom person, they press the raise hand on the Zoom if you want to ask a question.
Thank you. I had a quick question. So you mentioned the church in the Fillmore. Is that based on Calvary Presbyterian in the Fillmore, or
So,
which
yeah.
is a partner of Book Passage? That's why I bring it up.
Oh, wonderful,
We knew
okay.
that's there.
Yes, and I'm completely having a 52-year-old moment, if that's senior. That's the one on Jackson and Fillmore, right?
Yes.
Thank you, yes, that
It's
is
the whole
that
block.
is the one.
Yeah,
So my husband used to live, when we were dating and engaged, he lived on Jackson and Fillmore, so I'm like, I'm gonna put it right there.
Not to put a Book Passage spin on everything, but we have a lot of wonderful
Go
events
right
at
ahead.
Calvary Presbyterian, so.
Yeah, I thought of another question, because Francine, you mentioned that there's a guide for readers or questions for readers at the end of your book. I wonder how you decide what kind of questions that you're going to ask, what kind of things do you think people want to talk about in a book club?
I thought, well, what are the differences between then and now, and what are the similarities between then and now? Those are good social questions to ask. And actually, Midwest Review of Books said it was a really good book club book because it addresses a lot of psychological and social issues. So I started, I'd been through the book many times, and I thought, oh, well, let's see, why did Naomi do this? Why did she act as she did? And so that was one of the questions. Why do you think she did what she did? And do you think that Frank thought that he was morally correct, and do you think that he thought he was a good man, and that he was doing, and would you feel that way about him? So, there are a lot of things like that to discuss. Thank you for asking that.
Any last questions before we, one back here will be the last question, thank you.
The World at Home, do you have any other books before that?
Yeah, this is my third novel. So the first one was called The Seeing Garden. That takes place in 1910, and that was inspired by the Filoli estate in Woodside, California. So it's not set at Filoli, but it's that period. And then the second one is called A Golden Life, and that's 1938 from Hollywood to Napa.
Okay, I would like to have everybody give a round of applause and thank Janis and Francine for joining us this afternoon. We are not done yet because we have lovely reception items back there, and while you're taking part, I'm going to go ahead and reset the stage for signing. Speaking of signing, all of the books that we've been speaking of tonight are available at our book sellers stations at the front and in the middle there. Please do purchase them and support your local independent authors. Thank you so much for joining us today at Book Passage.
And thank you, Jonathan.
Customer.